Hello, welcome to another video. Today, as you can tell from the title and the thumbnail, I'm going to be taking you through all of the polar fantasy books I own. This feels like a very appropriate day to be doing this because there is snow outside, it is a snowy day, so I'm excited to be talking about polar fantasy stuff. I'm excited. This isn't necessarily a recommendations video, like I'm not going to go too deep into these books because there's a lot of them, with polar fantasy being a genre that I really love. I have got quite a stack. Some of these are series, some of them not. Some of them I haven't read yet, but I will go through those separately so you know I have read them. But as a general rule, if it's a polar fantasy that I have read and is still on my shelf, then generally that would mean that it's a thumbs up from me. But if it isn't, or if there's anything I need to specifically address, then I will do that when I talk about it. But yeah, I'm not going to go too deep into any of these books because there's a lot of them. I don't want this to be massively long, but with Polarthon coming up, it's about time we talk about some polar fantasy books. Before we do dive into that though, I just want to let you know that these are currently still available. We have sold a lot more of them than I was anticipating. We are getting through the stock and we won't be reordering them because they are specifically for Polarthon. So if you did want to get your hands on the Polarthon bookmarks, I will leave the link to them down below. I suppose they are limited edition. I just didn't expect us to be getting through them quite so quickly. So if you do want to get your hands on them, then the link will be down below. They are adorable and I'm very proud of them. So if you are not familiar with what Polarthon is, it is my polar fantasy themed readathon. It's happening in the first week of February. I will link my announcement somewhere for you. But yeah, with all that being said, let's dive into all of the polar fantasy I own. And let's kick it off with the ones I have not read. First up, we have A Wolf for a Spell by Kara Sutton. This is the middle grade monthly pick for February, and I'm very excited about this. It is gorgeous, absolutely beautiful, heavily inspired by Slavic mythology. We've got Baba Yaga in this one, and this follows a young wolf who has always been told to fear humans, especially witches. However, her family is in danger and she needs to seek help from Baba Yaga. And Baba Yaga doesn't usually do magic for free, but it just so happens that she needs a wolf's keen nose, and they realise they fight a common enemy. So it's Baba Yaga and this wolf pup. I'm very excited about this, but yeah, I haven't read it, so I don't know the full extent of the polar fantasy elements of it. However, I have been told that it is, so I trust that, and I am looking forward to diving into this one. Next up, we have The Christmasaurus and the Winter Witch. Of course, this is a Christmas dinosaur, so of course it is polar fantasy. Where does this dinosaur come from? I have no idea, but polar fantasy element is definitely present in this, and this is about a young boy who I believe was in a car accident, and he has an adventure with this most unusual dinosaur, and then it happens again. I don't know too much about these, but definitely polar fantasy, but also Christmassy. So whether they're appropriate for Polarthon, I don't know, but it's there. Next up, we have The Wolf Wilder by Catherine Rundell. This one is one I'm very excited to get to myself. I believe this girl has some sort of affinity for wolves, and she's journeying across snowy Russia. There's a revolution, and this is our main girl's story. Is her name Theodora? Yeah, Theodora. And 4 wild wolves that she loves across snowy Russia to the heart of a revolution. I'm looking forward to this one. The cover is absolutely gorgeous. Next up, we have Ember and the Ice Dragons by Heather Fawcett. This is one I'm really eager to get to myself. This is about a young dragon called Ember St. Clair and her wizard of a father, but she has a tendency to burst into flames. So they send her to be with the ice dragons. However, someone is hunting the ice dragons, and Ember, of course, is not into that. So I think she tries to, like, join the hunters and sabotage it from the inside, I think, is how this goes, because Ember used to be a dragon. However, she's been put into the body of a little girl. But yeah, I'm really excited to get to this one. I've heard some fantastic things about it, so I'm eager for this. It looks adorable, and I really like Heather Fawcett's writing, so I'm excited for this one. And the last one here that I haven't read is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, and it's polar fantasy. I don't know too much more about it than that. We all know what Rumpelstiltskin is about. So yeah, looking forward to getting to this one myself. Maybe I'll try and get to it this Polarthon. We will see. And then we kick into ones that I have read. So I'm going to start this off with kind of the outlier here being Northern Lights. This is a very famous polar fantasy. Everyone knows and loves this. I didn't love it though. So just going to address that it's one of the ones on this list that I am not a massive fan of. So yeah, but this one is definitely polar fantasy, going to the Northern Lights. There's a polar bear. I just didn't love it. So yeah. But this isn't a review video, so we're just going to list through these and I'll mention key points. Next up we have Lisa Ludek's A Shiver of Snow and Sky and A Storm of Ice and Stars. These are massively underrated. I love both of these. They are heavily polar fantasy, very magical, very atmospheric, and I adore them very much. Highly recommend both of these. Then we have Brightstorm by Vashti Hardy. This is a middle grade that I adore as well. There is a journey to South Polaris. There is a skyship. There is adventure. I love it very much. Follows the twins Arthur and Maudie and their journey for the truth, which takes them to South Polaris. And I love it very much. Highly recommend. Next up we have The Way Past Winter by Kieran Millward Hargrave. This follows a young girl called Mila who wakes up to discover her brother has gone missing along with every other boy in the village, and she journeys to discover the truth. Again, very polar fantasy, lots of snowy elements in this one as well. Next up we have Snow Like Ashes by Sarah Rash. The whole trilogy would count for this. I haven't read the third one, but there is definitely polar fantasy elements in these books. I'm not a massive fan of them, but I didn't dislike them either, but they count, so here they are. So this one follows like the fall of the Kingdom of Winter. It's a world that's separated into like the seasons, so the Kingdom of Winter, Summer, Autumn, Spring, and it is the fall of winter and what happens following that, and kind of like the revolution to bring winter back. So definitely a polar fantasy. Next up we have another Christmassy one, which is Tinsel by Sybil Pounder. This one follows the true story of Christmas. What if we got the origin stories of Christmas all wrong and it was actually created by a young girl called Blanche Claus? So it is Christmassy, but also there is definitely a polar fantasy element to it as well. I really enjoyed this. It was fun, it was quick, but Christmassy. So maybe not the right time of year to read it, but it was good fun, and I do recommend. Next up, we have Northchild by Edith Patu. This is the UK republication of this. It's also known as East. So just to clear up that. So I think this combines the US copies, but I'm really not entirely sure. But we've got book 1, East, book 2, South, 3, West, and 4, North. So it does separate out, and I have heard that this combines both of the books that are published in the US. But yeah, Northchild. And this follows a young girl called Rose, who is an unusual child because she was born facing north, and there is a superstition about why that's not a good thing. And it is her adventure, her discovery, her journey, and I absolutely adored this book with every fibre of my being, and I very highly recommend it. I love it very much. There is a polar bear, there is snowy Arctic adventure, good fun. Next up, I'm just gonna fly through the Sophie Anderson books because we have The House with Chicken Legs, The Girl Who Speaks Bear, and The Castle of Tangled Magic, and this one may be debatable for people. However, I would consider all three of these polar fantasies. They're heavily inspired by Slavic folklore, and I just would, especially The Girl Who Speaks Bear and The Castle of Tangled Magic. This one kind of travels a bit more, but I would count all three of these if you wanted to read any of these for a polar fantasy. This one follows a young girl called Marinka, who is the granddaughter of Baba Yaga, and she is destined to become a Yaga herself. However, she doesn't want to. She wants to change her fate. This one follows a young girl called Yanka, and she's referred to as Yanka the Bear because she's big and strong, and she was abandoned in a bear cave as a baby, and she is desperate to discover where she really came from, who her real parents are, and where she belongs. And then The Castle of Tangled Magic follows a young girl called Olia, who lives in a castle with some tangled magic, and she needs to untangle this magic and find out the truth of the magic and how to save the castle. But yeah, I would count all three of these, and I adore all three of these, so if you haven't read Sophie Anderson, I very much encourage you to do so, because these are all absolutely fantastic, and it just gets better. Although they're not necessarily a series, they are companions, and I do think you should read them in order, but it's not 100% necessary. But I think you should. Next up, we have Frostheart and Escape from Aurora, Frostheart 1 and Frostheart 2. Of course, these have to be on here. These are phenomenal. They are also beautiful, but these take place entirely in the snow and ice, and it is very fantastical. So 100% a polar fantasy. Follows a young boy called Ash and his journey to find his parents. He lives in a world where there are these strongholds that are surrounded by the snow sea, and hidden within the snow sea are leviathans, which are these like big dangerous creatures. So it's his adventure through the strongholds across the snow sea to find his parents. Highly recommend these entirely. Next up we have Green Glass House by Kate Milford. This one I wasn't entirely sure if I would put on here because I don't know if I would count it as fantasy or paranormal, but we're gonna go with including it on here. This is about a young boy called Milo and his winter at Green Glass House, which is a hotel that his family run. It is very wintry, very polar vibes, and there is a paranormal fantasy element, but I don't want to say what it is because it spoils it. So I will leave it at that. But I enjoyed this one. Not a favourite of mine. I don't absolutely love it, but I do still recommend it. It was an enjoyable read, and it is very polar and has that sort of fantasy element. Next up we have Sky Song by Abby Elphinstone. This is so polar fantasy, and this is one of the first ones that I read actually, and one that solidified my love for the genre. I adore this book very much. It takes place entirely in this like snowy community, and our main character Eska breaks free of a cursed music box. There is evil, there is good, there is Arctic snowy adventure, all sorts of furry friends along the way as well. There are polar bears and wolves and whales and an ice queen, and I really love this. It was very good, and I highly recommend. Very polar fantasy. My stack is piling up. You might see it soon. Next up we have Even the Darkest Stars and All the Wandering Light, again by Heather Fawcett, so I mentioned her earlier with Ember and the Ice Dragons. These are books that also solidified my love for the genre, especially Even the Darkest Stars, because this is the first in the series, so this is its sequel, and it is just a duology. But this follows a young girl called Kamsin, who is desperate to become the royal explorer. She wants to explore these massive snowy mountains and go on adventures, and she's not sure if that is going to happen, and then maybe something happens where it does happen, and this adventure takes place, and this is way more fantastical than I initially thought it would be. But there are dragons, there are ghosts, there are witches, there are shapeshifters. There is so much packed into this, and it is a snowy, mountainous adventure, and then this one is the sequel, obviously follows on from that. I love these, and I think they are massively underrated and beautiful, so these. Next up, something else that solidified my love for the genre, we have the Polar Bear Explorers Club, Explorers on Witch Mountain, and Explorers on Black Ice Bridge, the Polar Bear Explorers Club trilogy by Alex Bell. These are phenomenal. I love these. These are middle grades. They follow a young girl called Stella Starflake Pearl, who is the adopted daughter of someone who is in the Polar Bear Explorers Club, and she wants to join the Explorers Club. However, it's not for girls and she shouldn't do that. But somehow she finds a way. She joins the club. They go on an adventure and discover all sorts, including some carnivorous cabbages, correct? Carnivorous cabbages. It's just a wild, snowy Arctic adventure with brilliant friendships made along the way. There is just that right hit of magic. It's fun, it's heartwarming. I really recommend. I have loved all of these, and if you're a fan of middle grade, then they are a must read. In my opinion, I adore them very much, and yeah. 100% polar fantasy. Again, one of the things that solidified my love for the genre. It's gonna fall over. This stack is gonna fall over at some point. Next up, we have a new love of mine, which is A Winter's Promise by Christelle DeBose. This is one that I have fallen in love with. This follows a young girl called Ophelia, who comes from a world that is split into arcs, and on each of these arcs they are all descendants of a family spirit. And Ophelia is a descendant of Artemis, and she is kind of sold off in a political marriage to a descendant of Farouk, who comes from a snowy northern pole where everyone's a bit harsh. It gets very political. Ophelia's kind of thrown into these clan wars, and the series has taken some turns, but I'm a big fan of this, but it is definitely a polar fantasy because we go to the pole and it's very fantastical. I'm a big fan of these. I recommend. Next up, we have The Eye of the North by Sinead O'Hart. This is one that I read so long ago and still sticks with me. It's a middle grade that has such danger and it's absolutely beautiful. Look at all that foiling. Gorgeous. But this one follows a young girl called Emmeline whose parents have vanished, and she is sent to France and somehow gets involved. I can't remember exactly, a little bit foggy, but somehow gets involved in this plot with this like evil doctor who wants to unleash a mythical monster from the depths of the Northern Sea, and she goes to this frozen land. They want to unleash this mythical monster from like under the ice. This was wild. I adored this. There is real danger, there is tension, and I really enjoyed Emmeline. And this book as a whole, it took some turns. I had a good time. Next up, we have Hunted by Megan Spooner. This one is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and again could be one that's debatable. However, you can tell from that cover, it is snowy. It takes place in a snowy setting. There is magic and curses and all things that you would expect from a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but is set in this like snowy landscape. I really enjoyed this. Again, it has some sort of like Slavic folklore woven into it too. It's been a long time since I read this, so I can't remember like details, but I did enjoy it. I have some memories of it. And it counts as a polar fantasy. It's also like the most reflective thing. Look at that shine. Literally, you are here, so is the stack. I'll show you it in a sec. Next up, we have Frostfire by Jamie Smith. This is one that I think is massively underrated. The year that I read this, my Goodreads year in review thing told me that this was my least read book, like the one that the least people had read, and only 10 people had read it on Goodreads that year. So I want to push this book massively because it was fantastic. The illustration on it is gorgeous. Like the book itself is so pretty. Like it's just a gorgeous book. It's illustrated by Carl James Mountford. We know I love him. This one follows a young girl called Sabria, who is chosen for this honour of being bonded with a frost sliver from the mountain that like overlooks their village, and this mountain is like a sentient thing, and a select few are given the honour of bonding with a sliver of it that becomes like part of their being and gives them this sort of icy magic. But in order to do this, she has to embark on this really dangerous pilgrimage to the mountain where she discovers some things that really she didn't want to discover, and there is danger at every turn for her. While she's on this pilgrimage, there is an avalanche that destroys her opportunity of getting home, so she needs to find another way to make this journey. But while she does that, she discovers some secrets lurking within the mountain, and it's all very dangerous for her. I really enjoyed this one and entirely recommend. So, Frostfire by Jamie Smith. Give it a go. And finally, the last little stack I have for you here is The Bear and the Nightingale trilogy, the Winter Night trilogy. Bear and the Nightingale, The Girl in the Tower, and The Winter of the Witch, all by Catherine Arden. And these are my faves. I love these so much. I mean, a lot of these in this stack are my favourites. But so are these. This series, these are adult polar fantasies. This series follows a young girl called Vasya who has the gift of sight. She can see the old gods. However, her father remarries a Christian woman who brings a priest to her village, and there is friction there, and the conversion of the town to Christianity damages the old gods, and there are evil gods lurking in the forests, and there is the Winter King being present there, but it's also very political, but very fantastical, very romantic. The atmosphere is incredible. I love these books, and Vasya is everything that society does not want her to be. She is an adventurer, she is bold, she is courageous, she does not want to marry, she does not want to live in a convent, she wants to disobey every order that's ever given to her to see the world and accomplish things and help the old gods. She gets involved in some magical stuff. I love these books very much. And that does finish up my stack that is now this high. So we are, what, three shelves up here? It's gonna fall over. So I will try and let that balance there for a sec. But yeah, that is all of the Polar Fantasy that I think I own. There's a good chance that there are going to be others on my shelves that I haven't read yet that do have Polar Fantasy elements in that I'm just not aware of entirely. So there's a chance that that's a thing. And of course there are other Polar Fantasies that I have read and since unhauled. For example, the Catherine Constable books, The Wolf Princess and Pearl and Ice were two Polar Fantasies I read and have since unhauled. The Shadows of Winterspell by Amy Wilson, again, is one that I no longer have but was a Polar Fantasy. There are others as well. But if you have any Polar Fantasy recommendations for me that are not in this stack and that you know I have not read, please let me know down below, because of course I'm always looking for more, especially in the lead up to Polarthon. It would be great for me to amass a new collection of Polar Fantasies to try and get through in that week. So if you do have any recommendations, I would love to hear them. Please and thank you. But yeah, that is the end of this video. I hope you have enjoyed. As I said, I didn't want to go too deep into any of these reads because I just wanted to get through that massive stack. But yeah, I hope this has been somewhat useful for you. If you have enjoyed, give us a thumbs up. Emoji of the video, let's just have snowflakes. That would be fantastic, Polarthon themed. But yeah, thanks for hanging out with me for a bit, and I will see you next time. Bye!